As a huge fan of the Batman Arkham series and what it did for the superhero genre, I've been waiting for a Spider-Man equivalent for years now, and I'm surprised it took them this long to make one. I've wanted a gaming experience that wasn't afraid to come up with its own story, and not rely on any movies or comic book storylines as its framework. It needed to create its own world and designs for its characters that best suited it, not shying away from any of the main event level supervillains, and have the hero take them all on in one big grudge match. I'm happy to say that, for the most part, Spider-Man on PS4 is everything I just mentioned and then some. It truly allows you to do whatever a spider can. Keep in mind, this video will contain spoilers for the main story, so if you haven't played it already, you've been warned. Now that that's off my conscience, let's begin. Marvel's Spider-Man is so faithful to its source material that it takes inspiration from basically every version that has existed. It has elements of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man with references to his trilogy of films, specifically Spider-Man 2, concepts from the Amazing Spider-Man movies with Harry Osborn suffering from a degenerative disease, the gadget-heavy suit design used within the MCU, and modernized twists of classic characters like J. Jonah Jameson, Aunt May, and Norman Osborn. The game plays it smart by targeting everyone's favorite version of this character to appeal to the widest audience possible, and it works. Spider-Man isn't an origin story either. It takes place 8 years into his crime-fighting career. It not only makes you care about the masked vigilante, but the person he is inside. There are countless times you play as Peter Parker in this game, and you genuinely relate to his character. He's having to balance his life as Spider-Man while interning at a laboratory run by Otto Octavius. He struggles to pay rent, gets evicted from his apartment at one point, and stresses over his relationship with Mary Jane Watson. It is everything you want in a Spider-Man story, and much, much more. Marvel's Spider-Man takes its time establishing characters, and as the player, you get emotionally invested in all of them. Martin Lee is such a kind and caring person running the homeless shelter Feast that it becomes increasingly depressing when you see the horrific acts he commits as Mr. Negative. The personal relationship between Peter and Otto is heartwarming too, like any student-mentor or even father-son relationship is. From the very get-go, you know what will happen to Octavius, but you don't want to believe it. For the first time ever, you actually want the villain to stay good for a change. And speaking of Dr. Octopus, this version is just as good as the one found in Spider-Man 2, just for different reasons. The game really stresses the idea of Doc Ock being the smartest villain Spider-Man has ever faced. It's also extremely disturbing in many ways too, because you get a sense that Octavius was acting this way a lot sooner than he lets on. You just didn't know it yet.
Octavius. First and final warning. Stay out of our way.
The web swinging here is definitely the best we've ever had in a Spider-Man game. It's extremely responsive and satisfying swinging through the open world of New York City. The only nitpick I have with it is that it still favors the R2 button, which Spider-Man games have done for 20 years now. I get that it's something we're all used to and familiar with. It'd probably feel weird if R2 wasn't used, but there's gotta be something else they can try to shake things up a bit. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 at least had 2 separate buttons, L2 and R2, signifying each hand, which was kind of cool. I'm not saying that game was good, or its swinging system is better than this one, just that it was a bit more unique. When I started playing Spider-Man on PS4, and it said to press R2, I have to admit a tiny thing inside me felt a little disappointed. Regardless, the web swinging is a lot of fun and very addictive. I spent hours traversing the city. I also like the idea of a fast travel option to keep in your back pocket, but thankfully, the web swinging is enjoyable enough that you rarely need or want to use it. I think a big aspect that helps with all this, though, is the fact that New York feels so alive in this game. In previous Spider-Man titles, the open world felt so lifeless and dull. The buildings were all simple block shapes without much personality, and it felt very artificial. In this game, however, everything has character and is vastly different than everything else, not only in terms of shape, but also color. The civilians on ground level feel more realistic too, and you can interact with them in a variety of ways. There are also a lot of cool buildings, specific to the greater Marvel universe, like Avengers Tower and Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum, which breathes even more life into everything. But what's probably even better than the web swinging is the combat system. It's very addictive, fast-paced, and fits the character of Spider-Man to a T. Despite taking elements from the Batman Arkham series, it manages to implement many new ideas as well. Honestly, I enjoy both these combat systems, and they match their respective heroes perfectly. The individual suit powers you could mix and match were a cool idea too, but unfortunately, many of them weren't all that useful to me. I found myself keeping the default one that allowed Spider-Man to generate focus for a short period of time, which meant you could heal yourself and perform multiple takedowns in succession. The rest seemed too simple and gimmicky to me, and I never felt they served much of a purpose. One of the things I didn't like about this game was the strong focus it had on MJ and Miles Morales as playable characters. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed their inclusion in the story, I just didn't want to play as them. Their stealth missions that are sprinkled in throughout the game weren't that interesting and for the most part were just plain annoying. I know why they were there, to bring a more grounded and human perspective to everything going on, and give you some context in terms of their characters, but I found them to be very boring and slowed the story down to a crawl every time one popped up. It seemed like it was just padding to lengthen out the game. What bothers me the most about them too is that the AI is way too predictable. They either don't see you when they should, are easy to exploit and take advantage of, or in some cases, can be completely bypassed altogether to get to the objective. If this is the case, then why bother putting them in the game to begin with? Let me just play as Spider-Man. It's why I bought the damn thing in the first place. The stealth in this game in general is enjoyable, with multiple ways of dispatching your enemies, but as a fan of the Arkham games, I think it would benefit from being able to hide yourself again after being spotted. Now I understand in stealth, the whole point is to remain unseen, but when you are, it just becomes a big slugfest like many other parts of the game, and loses its distinction. When you get to these segments, it'd be nice to know you can keep it as such, and not have to resort to fighting all the time. It'd be a nice way to keep these sequences separate from one another a little bit more. Now I wasn't expecting there to be side missions in this game. I was happy to see them, and their inclusion took me off guard a bit. With that said, they're unfortunately some of the most disappointing aspects of the game, in my opinion. Apart from the one where you track down Tombstone, or another where Taskmaster forces you to take on his challenges, followed by a pretty epic boss fight, many of the side missions are fairly boring and stale. Mind you, there is a lot more variety than previous Spider-Man games, so it isn't that repetitive with what you're asked to do, but it still doesn't change the fact that most of them are not that interesting. They're just random tasks given to you by New Yorkers, and most of them are completely pointless and sometimes downright silly, like chasing pigeons for a homeless man, or helping Harry save the environment, Captain Planet style, which of course is a noble act, but one I didn't want to play in a video game. The side missions were Insomniac's chance to pack in as many side characters and B-lister villains they could, to really flesh out this game and make it head and shoulders above every other Spider-Man title that came before it. At one point, Spider-Man references the Chameleon, but it doesn't go anywhere, it's a throwaway line. I think if they took the time to pursue a few more of these characters, adjacent to the main story, it would have felt even more epic than it already was. I think Spider-Man games need to learn from the Batman Arkham series, and not be afraid to have a huge cast of characters. So many of them rely on one or two big names, and then add a ton of filler. Spider-Man on PS4 is a lot better, mind you, with the inclusion of its own version of the Sinister Six, but I still think there was a missed opportunity here. It could have been even more stacked than it already was.
I know you! You were on my neighbor's porch for Halloween!
The name's Taskmaster, and you're about to get taken to school.
Speaking of villains, let's discuss the boss battles in this game. To put it bluntly, they aren't very impressive. Many of them are just simply glorified cinematics with a bit of gameplay thrown in, usually in the form of QuickTime events and the like. They aren't very challenging, and usually focus on one strategy alone to beat them, a certain attack or combo from your moves list. Regardless, I found them very fun and epic to play through, and taking on the likes of the Kingpin and Shocker never gets old. Shocker especially was a bit surprising because you had a chase sequence shortly before his boss fight. That never happens with him. It's usually a character that can fly or something in these games. It was different, that's for sure. Scorpion's fight was one of my favorites in the game, taking heavy influences from the Copperhead sequence in Batman Arkham Origins, having the hero poisoned and needing to find an antidote. The disorienting city you had to swing through as scorpion tails attacked you and a poisonous liquid rose from the streets, a fun nod to the original Spider-Man game on PS1, was really cool. There's also a sequence where you follow Otto through twisted pieces of New York, which reminded me of Ra's al Ghul's Demon Trials in Arkham City. One thing I did find a bit jarring was the fact that you fight most of the main supervillains in groups of 2 as you near the end of the game, Vulture teaming up with Electro and Rhino teaming up with Scorpion. I enjoyed the 2-on-1 battles, which isn't something you see in the genre very often, but I did get a sense that there were some pacing issues going on, as if they were rushing through the last third of this game and not taking their time with each confrontation. Dr. Octopus's fight at the end was an epic and emotional moment, don't get me wrong, but gameplay-wise it was somewhat anticlimactic. I found him far too easy, probably the easiest in the entire game, because you could just mash the R1 button at him, and as long as you time the dodges correctly, not get hit once, or at least very little. This is the first installment in what could be an amazing series, so I'm going to go easy on Insomniac a bit, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize they put more focus on the storytelling aspect of these boss battles, with the cinematic feel to them, and less on the gameplay element. It's not a bad thing by any means, but I would like to see more of a balance in the future. Spider-Man on PS4 is an outstanding superhero experience, and has easily become one of my favorite video games ever. Its gameplay is addictive, the story is well written and a breath of fresh air compared to the last 10 years or so of Spider-Man games that seem to be treading water, and if there is a sequel, then this is a strong starting point for a franchise. It laid the groundwork for future installments, and I can't wait to see what comes next. With that said, there were some issues with it. The game's pacing is a bit uneven, with the story not really hitting its stride until about halfway through. The MJ and Miles sequences are boring and unnecessary, and could easily be covered with a cutscene or heck, a QuickTime event if need be. And despite the epic cast of supervillains, they could have chosen a few more big names we haven't seen as much. I like Vulture, Rhino, Scorpion, and Electro, but I mean, they seem to be in every Spider-Man game ever made. I'd like to see a bit more variety every now and then. Their vibrant and colorful designs definitely helped with this though, made them feel new and interesting. I wouldn't mind seeing Mysterio make an appearance in the sequel, or even have Insomniac push their limits and bring us a totally different version of the Green Goblin we have not yet seen before. I'd prefer that Norman Osborn be turned into him, but if Harry is too, that'd be cool. A lot of people have been speculating over the symbiote Easter egg at the end, but honestly, I think Oscorp just uses them as a method of healing, hinted at during the MJ mission in Grand Central Station. I don't think Harry is turning into Venom or anything, they're just setting up symbiotes for future usage down the road. I think Green Goblin has a lot of potential, especially when Insomniac can take their time with him and really flesh him out. They shouldn't be afraid to take the character on, despite his countless mainstream appearances over the years. This has been NerdGasm. Thanks for watching the video, and I hope you enjoyed it. As you can probably tell, I have a new video editing software which will help me push this channel and its videos to the next level. I hope to do more in-depth video game reviews like this one, and focus more on my most successful series, like my top 10 villains, video essay editorials, and maybe even the return of Supervillain Breakdown, so stay tuned. Realize though, it takes me even longer to write, record, and edit these videos, so I simply ask for your patience and support while I get them done. Feel free to help my channel out by sharing the video to all your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. The next game I plan on reviewing is Batman Arkham Asylum on PS4, followed by each of its sequels, including Arkham City, Arkham Knight, and even Warner Bros. Montreal's underrated Arkham Origins from 2013. That game series has probably impacted me the most than any other, and I'm excited to finally talk about it in depth. I will see you all next time. Take care, stay tuned, and always remain nerdy.
Such a disappointment. Parker. You knew? I tried. to warn you, Peter, but you didn't listen. You knew. I won't let you win. This means too much to me. Not more than it means to me!